Good evening, I'm Faye Kwan, and kicking off 2026, these are our top stories for tonight. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says a deal to end the war is just 10% away, and Taiwan vows to defend its sovereignty after China launches fresh military drills. All that and more coming up on AWANI International. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says his country is about 10% away from reaching a deal to end the war with Russia, but warns that the remaining issues are the most critical. He says any agreement must not reward Moscow for its aggression and adds that the unresolved points will determine Ukraine's future security, as well as the prospects for lasting peace in Europe. In his New Year's Eve address, Zelensky said Ukraine wants the war to end, but not at the cost of its sovereignty or safety, adding that any peace settlement must include firm security guarantees to prevent Russia from launching another invasion. He also said the final 10% of negotiations would shape not only peace for Ukraine, but stability across the wider European continent. The comments come just hours after US officials, including envoy Steve Witkoff, held talks with Ukrainian and European security advisors. US-led diplomatic efforts to end Europe's deadliest conflict since the Second World War have intensified in recent weeks, though both sides remain deeply divided. The main sticking point remains to be territory, with post-war settlement talks stalled over control of Russian-occupied regions. President Lai Ching-te says Taiwan is determined to defend its sovereignty and strengthen its defenses amid growing military pressure from China. He warns that the international community is closely watching to see whether the people of Taiwan will show the resolve to defend themselves and protect their democratic system. The remarks came after China launched rockets towards Taiwan during large-scale military drills conducted near the island. Lai said the exercises exposed the urgent need to boost defense procurement and speed up military modernization. He also urged opposition parties to back a proposed $40 billion increase in defense spending, which remains stalled in Taiwan's opposition-controlled parliament. Describing 2026 as a critical year, Lai said the government must prepare for the worst while continuing to hope for stability. Meanwhile, in his New Year address, China's President Xi Jinping reiterated that Beijing's reunification with Taiwan cannot be stopped. We'll be back with more after the break. Stay tuned.
Musim semakin memuncak. Di sini tiada ruang untuk ragu. Yang kental melangkah, yang berani mencipta sejarah.
Cantik! Wow!
Setiap perlawanan jadi penentuan. Demi sorakan, penyokong setia. Ini padang kita. Liga Super secara langsung di Astro Arena Bola dan Astro Go.
Welcome back. Russian President Vladimir Putin uses his annual televised New Year address to rally troops fighting in Ukraine, expressing confidence in what he describes as an eventual victory. He portrays the war as part of an existential struggle with the West, saying national unity is the foundation of Russia's sovereignty and security. In his speech, Putin said Russian forces were advancing slowly but steadily in Ukraine. He paid tribute to the troops on the front line, describing them as heroes who deserve nationwide support and recognition. Meanwhile, Russia's top military commander urged troops to expand so-called buffer zones in Ukraine's Sumy and Kharkiv regions. He claimed the Russian forces advanced more rapidly in December than in any other month in 2025. European leaders meeting in Paris on January 6 are expected to make strong commitments to protect Ukraine in any future peace deal with Russia, according to French President Emmanuel Macron. He says the pledges aim to ensure a just and lasting peace across Europe once the war ends through negotiation.
He has convened a meeting of the so-called Coalition of the Willing, a group led by France and Britain that brings together more than 30 countries. The announcement follows comments from the United States Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, who said recent talks had focused on strengthening security guarantees for Ukraine. Those discussions involve US officials, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, and national security advisors from Britain, France, and Germany. In mid-December, leaders from Germany, France, and Britain reported strong alignment with Washington after high-level talks in Berlin. They outlined shared objectives, including continued support for Ukraine's armed forces and preparations for European-led peacekeeping mission. The plans also include firm commitments to respond with force should Ukraine come under attack again after a peace agreement is reached.
In other news, France plans to ban children under the age of 15 from social media and to prohibit the use of mobile phones in high schools from September 2026. President Emmanuel Macron's government is expected to submit a draft legislation for legal review later this month. The proposals come amid growing public concern about online harms and the effects of excessive screen use on children and teenagers. Macron has repeatedly linked social media use to rising youth violence and wider behavioral problems among minors. He has suggested that France should follow Australia's lead, after Canberra introduced a world-first ban on social media access for under 16s in December. Mobile phones have already been banned in French primary and middle schools since 2018, and the new measures would extend that restriction to high schools. In 2023, France also passed a law requiring parental consent for children under 15 to open social media accounts, though enforcement has faced technical challenges. Meanwhile, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres condemns Israel's decision to block electricity and water supplies to facilities used by the UN's Palestinian Refugee Agency. The UN says the move severely restricts the agency's ability to operate and carry out its humanitarian and administrative work.
It added that international conventions protecting UN property, assets, and personnel remain fully enforced, adding the agency remains an essential part of the United Nations system. UNRWA's Commissioner General Philip Lazzarini also criticized the decision, describing it as part of what he called a systematic campaign against the agency. UNRWA provides education, healthcare, and humanitarian assistance to millions of Palestinians across Gaza, the West Bank, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. In 2024, Israel's parliament passed legislation banning UNRWA operations inside Israel and prohibiting official contact with the agency. As a result, UNRWA continues to operate in East Jerusalem, which the United Nations regard as occupied territory, despite Israel's claim to the entire city.
The US military says it conducted another strike on suspected drug trafficking vessels in international waters, killing 5 people and pushing the total death toll from the campaign to 110. The military says the operation targeted 3 suspected drug boats working together at sea on Tuesday.
United States Southern Command, which oversees military operations in Central and South America, said the boats were traveling as a convoy. It did not disclose the exact location, though similar operations have previously taken place in the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific. The command said the vessels were operated by groups it described as designated terrorist organizations, but did not name those involved. Since September, the US military has carried out more than 30 similar strikes on vessels it says were used for drug smuggling. However, it has not publicly released detailed evidence confirming the boat's involvement in narcotics trafficking.
Zoran Mamdani has been sworn in as mayor of New York City, beginning a term expected to bring early political confrontation with President Donald Trump. Just after midnight and as 2026 begins, Mamdani took his oath of office at an abandoned subway station during a private ceremony, formally assuming leadership of the nation's largest city.
At 34, he becomes New York's first Muslim mayor, a milestone in the city's long and diverse political history. Speaking after the ceremony, Mamdani described the moment as the greatest honor and privilege of his life. Yet significant questions remain over whether the once little-known Democrat can deliver on an ambitious agenda focus on affordability and public services. His proposals include rent freezes, universal childcare, and free public bus travel, policies likely to test both political backing and the city's finances. The role of President Trump may prove critical. While he has frequently criticized Mamdani, the two held unexpectedly cordial talks at the White House in November, a dynamic that could shape the mayor's early months in office.
The US has granted an annual license to Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing, also known as TSMC, allowing it to import US chip-making equipment to its facilities in Nanjing, China. South Korea's Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix have also received similar import licenses.
TSMC says the approval is necessary to ensure uninterrupted fab operations and product deliveries. Its Nanjing plant produces 16 nanometer and other mature node chips, and not its most advanced semiconductors, although the company also operates a chip-making facility in Shanghai. In its 2024 annual report, TSMC said the Nanjing site accounted for about 2.4% of its total revenue. Previously, Asian chip makers benefited from exemptions to Washington's sweeping export controls on chip-related technologies to China as part of the US efforts to maintain a technological edge over Beijing. But those privileges, known as validated end-user status, had expired on December 31st, meaning the companies now require export licenses to continue operations into 2026.
US President Donald Trump has signed a proclamation to delay a tariff hike on upholstered furniture, kitchen cabinets, and vanities. The higher duties had been set to take effect today, but will now be postponed until January 1st, 2027.
Under a proclamation issued in September, tariffs on certain upholstered wooden products were due to rise to 25 to 30%, while duties on kitchen cabinets and vanities were set to double to 50%. The latest move keeps the existing 25% tariffs in place, according to the White House. The delay also eases the pace of Trump's levies as voter frustration over high prices continue to simmer. A White House fact sheet said the U.S. was continuing productive negotiations with trade partners to address trade reciprocity and national security concerns related to wood product imports, suggesting that talks could lead to further deferrals of the proposed tariff increases.
Over in China, a 13% sales tax on contraceptives takes effect today as Beijing steps up efforts to boost birth rates. The move comes as January 1st marks 10 years since China scrapped its one-child policy.
The tax is part of a broader overhaul of the country's value-added tax or VAT system announced late last year, which removes several exemptions in place since 1994. Childcare services, marriage-related services, and elderly care are among those exempted from VAT. The measures form part of a wider push to encourage young couples to have more children after decades of strict birth controls that severely skewed China's demographics. Beijing has already raised the limit on the number of children per couple to 3, while provinces have experimented with IVF subsidies and cash incentives for larger families. But results have been limited. Official data showed the population had shrunk for a third straight year, with just 9.54 million babies born in 2024, about half the number recorded a decade ago.
That concludes AWANI International for tonight. Stay with us as we track the strategies and power shifts shaping the new global order. For more updates, visit international.astroawani.com and follow us on social media. I'm Faye Kwan. Thank you for watching and Happy New Year.